Now it's time to get ready to veneer the curved bent laminate that I made. There's actually two of these pieces I made for the mantle, and on the face is going to be curly maple. In fact, what I was able to get was some very, very nice western maple fiddleback figure, which just is the very best of the curl. As a matter of fact, this veneer is so nice that I went ahead and bought the entire lot that was remaining, which is several times more than I need for this project, just so I will have it. I got this from Certainly Wood up in New York. It's a very, very nice veneer. Now, on the inside of the curve, I need to veneer that also so that the pull from the veneer as it dries is equal front and back. When you veneer, as the glue dries, the veneer tends to shrink slightly, and this could cup the wood, and that's called pull. So what you like to do is veneer front and back whenever you can. So I've got some just some plain flat sawn maple veneer here that I will put onto the inside curve to even out the pull a little bit. I'm just cutting these to 12-inch lengths that I will then tape together. I've cut 7 sheets of the maple to 12 inches long. The idea being 3.5 of these sheets will cover the back of each of the substrates. These sheets are going to end up being between 10 and 11 inches long or wide, and the grain direction will be as so. Now, I've marked each sheet with a line. Alright, then I've taped them together as a pack, and I've made a square line where I should trim these so I can get them to the right width and have them nice and square. The reason for the mark is that as I lay up these sheets next to each other, I'll flip every other sheet over so that any error in the angle of the cut is going to be compensated for, and I'll end up with a sheet that is actually nice and flush on one edge. First thing we'll do is cut the pack to the right width, and I've made a line here where I should do my cut. And we're cutting longitudinally now, so the saw is cutting with the grain as opposed to a cross grain. And there we go. These edges, although they look nice and straight, they're not good enough for making the very flush veneer joints that we need. So I'm going to use this special jig, which is used to hold these veneers together, and then I can place them on the jointer. First thing I do is I get this approximately where I want it. I use my ratchet wrench to snug up the nut and bolt on each end. Okay. And now I'm just going to get my veneer to just protrude slightly. Just a little bit. Not much. Try to keep the protrusion the same on each end. The veneers are all cut to width. If I lay 3 large pieces plus a half of the last piece together, I get the 37 inches that I need to cover the entire inside of the form. Now you remember I said I was going to make a mark on each face so I could alternate these. So I got one here with a mark up, mark down, mark up, mark down. And when these are all taped together, any error in the angle of the cut should cancel out and the piece should have a nice straight edge. Now you recall when we made the substrate, I used thin perforated veneering tape to glue together my red oak veneers, and I did that because the center piece of red oak was going to be sandwiched between two pieces of bendable plywood, and so I wanted the tape to be very thin so it did not distort the laminate in any way, and also perforated so that glue could go through the holes and make lots of contact with the bendable plywood and the oak veneer. However, in this case, we're only going to veneer a single face. There's not going to be a sandwich of materials. So if I put tape on the outside of the face, that means on the inside that is against the substrate, there'll be just nothing but glue surface, no tape at all. That means I can use a thicker, more robust tape, and so now I'm going to use the thick veneer tape. It's not perforated, it's still very, very thin, but there's no holes. It's not perforated, and I can use more of this stuff because it'll be on the outside of the veneer, and later on then I can just remove it. So the first thing I do is go ahead and use just some thin little cross pieces of tape and tape together a couple pieces of veneer in about 3 places. Typically you put these tape on every 6 inches or so. All you do is wet it on the little stamp liquor that I have. And then I take one of the longer pieces and apply it full length. Now the tape is wet, so when it dries it's going to shrink up some, and that's going to even pull the joint together even closer. I use my iron set to medium-high heat. It feels very dry to me now. Alright, and let's see, if any luck, you'll have a joint here that is very invisible. Now I'm getting ready to cut the fiddleback maple. I'm going to need 4 sheets, each 12 inches long, book matched, to cover the whole front of one of the curved substrates. So to cover both curved substrates I need 8 sheets, so I've got 8 sheets of veneer from the same flitch. That means they're cut sequentially from the log, and that means the grain figure of each sheet is identical going on down through. So that tells me that I can take any 2 adjoining sheets and book match them, and I'll get a very nice perfect grain match. This is expensive stuff, $7.50 a square foot, so I don't want to make any mistake. So I've gone ahead and measured. I know I'll get the width I need. I know I'll get the 12 inches I need before I get into the end, which is sometimes cracked. And so now I'm going to go ahead and make these cuts. I got the whole stack of 8 here, so I'll just cut through them all. Success. Now, this type of veneer has a wavy surface. That's the reason it's curly. It's because the fibers undulate along the length. But when we actually veneer the substrate, we want the surface to be as smooth as we can. So I'm going to soften these fibers a little bit so they'll lay a little more flat. I'm going to do that by applying some veneer softener. This is pre-mixed veneer softener. It comes from veneersupplies.com. It's called Super Soft 2, but you can make your own as well. I'm just going to brush this on, let it dry, or let it get to where it looks dry, and then use an iron to actually dry it out and relax the fibers. And by the way, I numbered each of these sheets so I could get them back in the same order in which they were cut. So you can see what the softener does. What had been a fairly stiff piece of veneer is now very flexible. It's actually curled up some, which means that the bottom is still wetter than the top. So I'm going to take my iron, set to medium warm setting, just to dry out the veneer and help press out the wrinkles a little bit. I'm going to be careful here with it being curled like this that I don't break it. So I'm going to be very gentle. After ironing all the sheets of veneer, I went ahead and laid them out on a flat piece of MDF with a piece of paper towel in between each sheet, and then I weighted them down with a stack of magazines. Since it was near the end of the day, just let the paper towels absorb any residual moisture, let the moisture equalize throughout the sheets, and magazines being very heavy provide a good weighting action. So now let's go ahead and take the stack apart and see what we have. Okay, these sheets, when you compare them to the original veneer, are significantly smoother. They're not perfectly smooth. You really don't want that to be perfectly smooth, because part of the reason that you see the curl is because the grain is wavy, but we were at least able to make it a little less prominent in the waves, and that would help us with the gluing. And we'll keep them all in order here with the numbers that we put on there yesterday. Now we're in good shape. We can trim these up and tape them. There was a little bit of tear out on the grain because this is a wild grain. And I don't know if you can see it here in the video, but little chip outs here and up here and so forth, which will make the matching in this veneer bad. So I'm going to go ahead and clamp this whole thing up into on the bench and use a 50-degree angle hand plane, nice and sharp, to go ahead and hand plane that down. Now to trim that veneer, I'm going to use a plane iron with a 50-degree angle on it, and you end up with a very, very steep angle of approach into the wood, which cuts but also acts kind of like a scraper to take away those fibers without lifting and splitting them. What I'm using here is a low-angle jack plane. It's a nice long bed. I take my plane iron and I put it in the plane bevel up, being careful not to damage that edge. Now I can adjust this throat opening with an adjuster here. So I'm going to adjust it so it's a very fine opening, because the finer the opening, the less chance of chipping out. Okay, and then I'm going to go ahead and just take a few swipes. You see you get very fine little shavings. Alright, we've got it nice and smooth. I'm going to check this with an aluminum straight edge. Make sure we're looking nice and flat here, because I don't want to have to take it out of the jig and put it back in. So I'm just looking for a little daylight. I don't see any. I think we're in good shape. Now before we continue on with gluing the veneer to the substrate, I want to get a nice true edge on the substrate, and then basically once everything's true, I can make sure that the finished veneer fits exactly as it should. So I'm going to use the edge sander to true up one edge of this. I've got my dust collector going. You can hear it in the background, plus I'll be using the dust collector on the actual tool. The real test of the trued up edge is that the blank sits perpendicularly to a flat surface. So I'll use my shaper table here as a flat surface and my square. Part of the preparation for gluing on the veneer is to prepare the surface of the substrate. It's got some bleed through of the Unibond 800. It's a little bit rough, so I've got a little bit of 150 grit sandpaper on my Festool Rotex sander, and I'm just going to go ahead and clean it up a little bit. Now comes the critical part. We're going to glue the veneers onto the substrate. Now we're going to glue veneers to both sides so that when the veneers shrink and pull, they'll pull evenly on both sides of the substrate, and that will reduce the amount of deflection of the substrate. Sometimes if you only veneer one side, the substrate can actually put a little band in it as it dries. I'm going to use a cold bond adhesive called Better Bond. This is a resin glue, one part. It's got thickeners in it, and it's also tinted. You can get it in various tints. This particular tint is medium. The idea being that if there is any slight bleed through on the face veneer, it will be a fairly decent match. But I haven't had bleed through problems with this in the past, so I don't expect any now. Now you want to apply this with a roller. I'm not going to use the notch trowel like I did when I was gluing the substrate, because you're trying to get a specific thickness on this, thickness of heavy paint. The idea here is to put the glue only on the substrate, not on the veneer, and with a thickness of heavy paint, which then will give you the bond, but you won't have bleed through. You won't have so much glue that it bleeds through any pores and so forth in the finished veneer. So it's a heavy paint look. Okay, so I'm using the bottom veneer now for the inside. It's just plain maple that we taped up. I've made some marks to show where the center is, and I've trimmed this veneer so it is exactly the width of the substrate, which makes it much easier for me to line it up. And I'm going to go ahead and press it into place. Put a little tape on the ends. Alright, and then I'll take my finished veneer. Again, I've made marks, so I know where the center is. Okay, here we are, looking good. Let's go ahead and put it on the press. Just to give you a feel for how much pressure is actually on this, we go ahead and we measure the length, 37 inches. The width, 11 3/4 inches. We multiply that out. Okay, that's 434 square inches. Now, there's 26 inches of vacuum, The perfect vacuum is about 30 inches, and atmospheric pressure is about 14.7 pounds per square inch. And we come up with a total pressure on this surface of 5,538 pounds. That's almost 3 tons of pressure pressing down on this veneer against the substrate. That's why the form has to be so massive, and I spent so much time building it very, very strong so that it would be able to withstand that tremendous amount of force. The last step in the veneering process is to remove the veneer tape, and there's a couple ways to do that. You can sand it off, or you can wet it with wet the tape with some water and peel it off. I like usually to try to wet with water and peel off because it lessens any chance of sanding through the veneer. Okay, and then I'll just use a little spatula to lift up the edge. See if she's ready to peel. Maybe just gently peel it up. And dry it up right away. You don't want the water to soak in and affect the glue joint in any way. There you are.